The 1988 Mr. Universe that I won, I was not a Christian then. My goal was to be the best bodybuilder in the world, and I thought that would make me happy. And winning Mr. Universe was like the pinnacle. And it was literally one of the saddest days of my life. I looked in the mirror and I said to myself, I don't even like you, I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. I didn't like that person. And I was so sad. That led me on a journey now. And I started seeking God's face, and I realized bodybuilding was not the ticket. It wasn't going to make me happy, but there was something deeper. And I learned how to win championships, but what I really wanted was to be a champion.
Hey there, I'm Amy Connell. Welcome to Graced Health, the podcast for women who want simple and grace-filled ways to take care of themselves and enjoy a little chocolate as well. I'm a certified personal trainer and nutrition coach who wants you to know your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you're called to do. You know that saying, don't judge a book by its cover? As I sit here and wrap my brain around the conversation I just had, that phrase just keeps coming back to my head. Today I'm speaking with Ron Williams. I don't even know how to begin introducing him, honestly. I mean, you guys, he's done so much. He's an internationally decorated bodybuilder, former Mr. Universe, former professor of exercise physiology and nutrition. He's a pastor, master fitness trainer for the Army, author of several books, including Faith and Fat Loss, developer of the Iron Chest Master. He develops fitness products and personal coach. I mean, he's done it all. But what's so incredible is Ron's humility and just how humble he is. His faith is clearly the cornerstone of all he has done, though he will share a little bit about his path to his faith. It hasn't always been there. If you saw him, you might assume a few things, just like the saying. You might assume he's had quite a rosy life. You might assume he has no grace for imperfect eating or a missed workout. And you might assume his focus is all about looks because he still looks like a bodybuilder, even though he's been retired for a while. These would all be false assumptions. I know you are going to really appreciate all Ron has to say, much of which he also discusses in his book, Faith and Fat Loss. So I really encourage you to grab that if this conversation touches you. Now, I do want to caution you that we do speak of a couple traumatic events, particularly sexual assault. So if you need to choose a more appropriate time to listen, then hit pause, please come back. I know you don't want to miss this episode. Now, before we get to Ron, I want to remind you of the resources page over at gracedhealth.com/resources. Whether you're looking for food, fitness, or faith-based support, I have you covered. You'll find a 14-day devotional, on-the-go protein-powered breakfast, how to enjoy shame-free health by breaking 8 rules, and then my latest workout offering, squat-free strong legs. Again, that's at gracedhealth.com/resources. Okay, let's bring on Ron. Ron, welcome to the Graced Health podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited about this.
I am really excited as well. I told you before we started recording that my colleague, Pete McCall, who has the All About Fitness podcast and who has been a guest on this podcast a couple times, he and I were emailing back and forth, and I think he had just finished interviewing you, and he said, look, you have got to interview this guy, Ron Williams. He said, I think you will really enjoy him and your community will really enjoy him. And I'm so glad that he did because you have a really incredible story. I have introduced you before we came on and told everybody that you are a natural bodybuilder of the decade. And I was wondering if you could clarify a little bit, what is a natural bodybuilder?
A natural bodybuilder, I'm even more so. A natural bodybuilder is those that compete without taking steroids or enhancements. There are, but a lot of the natural bodybuilders will take supplements that I won't take. And the reason why is because before I'll take or put anything in my body, it has to have something to do with life and longevity, because that really is what building your body is all about. Building the temple of God, you want to make sure that you're enhancing your life rather than deteriorating from it.
I love that. That's great. You know, one of the things that I talk a lot about is you say longevity. I talk more about vibrance, but I feel like those are kind of sister words in terms of, yeah, let's take care of ourselves, but let's be able to do the things that we want to do later on down the road. I mean, I'm 46 years old, and you know, it's still, you know, things are kind of starting to hurt and tweak and all of that kind of stuff. And my goal now is a little bit is significantly less. I wish I could say not all at all, but you know, significantly less about what I look like, but more about like how am I preparing myself to live the next 40, God willing, 50 years or something like that. So I love that life and longevity with supplements. How do you discern that with the supplements? Because there are a lot of different supplements out there.
One thing I do extensive research, and I work real close with the biochemist, and he analyzes every single thing I put in my mouth. When I was competing, for 17 years, I worked with this guy, and he would analyze foods from the time they touched my tongue to the time they left my body. If it was conducive for my goal, then I ate that particular food. If it was counterproductive, I got rid of it. It wasn't considered food to me. It was a food like substance because it had calories in it, but it wasn't giving life and longevity. So we got rid of it.
That must have been quite a process.
Oh my goodness, you're telling me. I'll give you an example. One morning he came to my house about 6 o'clock, and I normally get up about 6:30 or 7. And he knocked on my door. I'm rubbing my eyes. I opened the door, let him in, and he put a bowl of white grapes on the table, and he looked at it. I mean, this guy is a little bit strange, and he says, "What do you feel?" And I said, "Man, I'm sleepy." He said, "No, no, no. Look at these grapes and tell me what you feel." And I looked at the grapes. I said, "Well, I'm a little hungry too. I guess my mouth is watering because I want to eat those grapes." He says, "Aha, digestion just started." And what he was saying was that the saliva in my mouth was also had digestive enzymes preparing to, to take in the sugar from the grapes. So it was already preparing to digest. The signal went to my brain, and digestion started before I even put it in my mouth. So we went through all sorts of tests. He tested my urine, my fecal matter, I mean, everything. So, we went through some really extensive testing for these years, and it was a blessing and a curse. The blessing part came in. I knew whatever I put in my mouth, I knew what it was doing when it was being processed through my system. But certain foods that I loved, I had to quit eating because I would visualize what they're doing in my body, and do I really want this to happen, and is this a benefit to me? So I had to get rid of a lot of the foods that were some of my favorites. So that kind of changed my life a bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. Was this this is a really fascinating process to me, and I won't stay too long on it because I have more important things that I want to talk about. But like, was this like an individual food process? Like that day with the white grapes, is that all you ate all day long? So that way you could really get a specific result, or how did that
No, no,
work?
no. For that particular thing that he was doing, he was showing me how digestion didn't start
Okay.
by chewing the food or eating, but it starts when your eyes actually sees the food. And with sugar, oftentimes what happens is when we're taking in sugar or something that causes the saliva to secrete in our mouth, we don't realize that digestion has already started. And when we drink something, for instance, Diet Coke, it has a sugar like substance in it. But some people have found it actually spikes your blood sugar level because the brain is triggered and looks at it as sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
some people that drink diet or eat diet foods find that they put on more weight because the
Yeah.
body can respond to it the same.
Right. Well, it's funny. What
Yeah.
I've noticed with Diet Coke is it I I say it impacts my blood sugar. So on those cheat meal days where I'll go out and have and this was a while ago, but if like I have a cheeseburger and fries and a Diet Coke, probably all things you don't eat. But an hour later, I'd be hungry, and I'm like, this does
Wow.
not add up. This does not add up. And so I
Yes.
finally figured out that it was that. So anyway, I promise I don't have that too much, but I still do because I'm a big believer in balance.
One of the things I found with some of the clients that I have, I take them through a process where they send me over every meal they put in their mouths, and especially if they're on keto, depending on the individual. And you'll see that when they use the keto meter, that even though they're not eating sugar, there are other things that spike the blood glucose level, which is stress is one of those things. If you have an underlying stress, so it helps me to troubleshoot what's causing the extra body fat that they're carrying or what's hindering their blood sugar so that we can change it. And that's one of the things that we really take pride in is troubleshooting to find out the source. Because if a person is carrying extra body fat and they don't know why, they could be exacerbating the problem. So we have to find out the root cause. Just like, in the Faith and Fat Loss book, we talk about the foundation or the root cause. If it's like a dandelion, if you cut the dandelion down, but the roots are still there, it's coming back. Body fat is the same way. If you don't get to the root of why it's there, it has a right to come back.
Well, that's one of the things I want to talk a little bit later about. But you've got some of these really incredible customized programs, which I think also from a faith perspective really speaks to the uniqueness in which God made us. I mean, because, people will hear about a particular eating plan or a diet or a fitness, and they're like, oh, well, this worked for so and so, so it's going to work for me as well. And it's not always the case because we're all so unique and our body chemistries are so different. So I love that you guys do that. I'm going to actually bookmark that because I want to come back to the troubleshooting. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into bodybuilding?
I was really insecure when I started in bodybuilding. I was on the Army boxing team, and my boxing coach said to me, have you ever thought about bodybuilding? And I thought, what? I haven't lost a fight yet. And you're talking about getting out of boxing? And he said, no, 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 no. I would compete in 3 sports in a weekend. I would compete in swimming and diving. I would compete in track and I would compete in boxing. And so we were running 13 miles a day. So I was extremely, extremely lean. And my body had developed in such a way that I went about 200 miles from where I was stationed and competed as a teenager and won. I hadn't trained for bodybuilding, didn't know much about bodybuilding, but my body had formed from all the other sports that I was participating in. And when I won the competition, I said they felt so sorry for me that they gave me first place. And I didn't even realize,
Probably not.
yeah, I didn't realize how competitive I looked until I saw pictures. I had this visualization or this vision of myself that was not very great because of my upbringing. I thought very little of Ron Williams. So yeah, that's how I started.
That's pretty incredible that he saw such promise in you. And two, I think that that's such a testament to just moving your body in a lot of different ways and what it does for you. I mean, rather than doing the same thing over and over and over. You talked a little bit about your upbringing. I'm just a little bit familiar with it from my research on you, but I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that because I think that that adds a lot of impact to your story.
Well, one is I was on the streets by the time I was 15 years old. I was dropped off at a babysitter's house when I was 3. And I was told, wait here until somebody comes home. And I wasn't wanted there. And from the time of 3, for several years, molested as a child, was illiterate, didn't learn to read until I was 28 years old. Then I started writing books and became a college professor. But it was just a really, really hard time. I was suicidal for many years. The only thing there were 2 events that stopped me from actually committing suicide. I tried a couple of times, but one event, a friend of mine next door fell out of a tree and his head hit a rake. and the rake was sticking through his head, and this kid didn't die. So I thought, man, I might try to kill myself and not die and end up like him because he was impaired after that.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, you
Yeah.
get hit by a
Ugh.
semi truck and then you're paralyzed, and then what? That
Yeah.
was one thing that stopped me. Another thing that stopped me is I fell through some ice when I was about 13 years old and I couldn't get out. And I thought, I've been wanting to die, and here it is. I am a dead kid. I mean, it's over now. And somehow I got out and I realized I didn't want to kill myself. I didn't really want to live, but I didn't want to kill myself. But here's a person that's alive that didn't care about his own life. So that's a hazard to society because I didn't care about my life, so I cared very little about anybody else's. And this is a kid that threats don't work with, you know. So I understand the youth sometime today because if they feel that way, because I had a guy that was going to shoot me. It was like, do me a favor, you know. The pain stops then. The pain was so great. And suicide, the reason why people commit suicide is not because of tomorrow, it's because of yesterday. You don't want to see another yesterday. Yesterday was so horrible that you don't want to revisit it. So you'd rather check out.
Wow. That's really hard to hear. I can only imagine how hard it must have been to go through. I mean, that's what a hard story. And what I'm trying to wrap my brain around is how you got from there to today. Ron Williams, the decade natural bodybuilder of the year, Ron Williams, the pastor, Ron Williams, the coach, the writer. I mean, there's so many threads that I want to follow there, but I think the one that I want to follow is learning about your path to Jesus, because a lot of us and a lot of people in my community, and me included, I mean, we grew up going to church, and every Sunday you got up and you put your Sunday school clothes on and you went to church, and it wasn't really anything, life changing. Now, for some people, it absolutely was, but I know for my story, I mean, I just grew up in the church. So I feel like coming from that position and coming from having suicidal thoughts, coming from not feeling loved, not feeling wanted, to where you are now, tell us a little bit about how you got to know Jesus.
Well, first, I wasn't atheist. I believed in God, but I hated God.
Okay.
And the reason I hated God was because, I had Christian people talk to me and say, God loves you. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
he loves you, but he doesn't love me because why did I go through all of the pain and the suffering that I've gone through and still yet going through? I mean, I don't believe he loves me. So it's me. If my mother didn't love me, my father didn't love me, Santa Claus never came around, so he didn't like me either. And so all of these supposedly good figures didn't like me. So I felt that my life wasn't worth living. I wasn't worth loving, and I was unlovable. I felt I was a waste of space and just wasting air. Why am I even here anyway? And I looked at other people that were smiling and laughing and appeared to be happy, and I just wasn't. So I thought, God is real, but he hates me. So it was me against the world and me against God. Um, as Christians would talk to me about Jesus, I'd say, God's got, he's let him do his thing and I'll do mine because I've got to survive. I've got real problems, real issues. I don't even know where I'm going to sleep tonight, and you're telling me about this God. And so I remember, back in 1988, when AIDS, the disease, was really pronounced. I had just come back from Germany. I was in the military, and I remember having a few good times over there, and it was with some friends that were German. And I met this German girl at a club, and I asked her to go home with me. One thing I hated was being alone. And I convinced her, and she finally said she would. And ended up, long story short, she didn't. And they were talking about AIDS on TV. They were saying that AIDS came from monkeys in Africa and, the whole spiel. And then they said, there's a girl who's going around who's taking men to hotels and leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning, but writing on the mirror, welcome to the world of AIDS. Well, I looked at that at the TV program because I was just walking past the TV. I looked at it, and it was a mugshot of the girl that I was going to take home. And I realized
Whoa.
then, I realized then that my life was in jeopardy, and I just didn't want to. I didn't mind dying, but I didn't want to die like that. Here I am, a bodybuilder. First thing happens is you start to lose weight and you deteriorate, you get sick. And,
Yeah.
back then they were afraid if you drank from the same cup that somebody
Yeah.
that had AIDS, you would get it then. And I was just, I was just petrified. And so I just kept going around and around and around with that. And finally, I heard a voice that told me that he was going to take my life. And it was the voice of the adversary. It wasn't a man's voice because I wasn't afraid of anything, but this voice trembled through my body. And for the first time, I remember at 13, I was beaten with an extension cord for doing something that I didn't do. And I said, I'll never cry for you again. And I just stopped crying. My tear ducts dried up. And this was the first time since then that I had cried. And I said, I don't want to die like this. And I said, God, if you're
Wow.
really real, change my life. If you could take nothing and do something, then here's nothing. And for the first time, I heard God's voice. And he said, you're fighting against an enemy that you cannot defeat. He knows your weaknesses. He knows all your strengths. He knows how to turn friends against you, even when they don't want to. And you can't defeat this enemy unless you have a spirit, and that's the Holy Spirit. He said the enemy is the spirit, and the only way you can defeat him is with the Holy Spirit. So I said, whatever it is, give it to me. And at that point, God, in my apartment, baptized me in the Holy Spirit. And my life has been different ever since.
That's incredible. I mean, just looking back on that story of that girl you were asking to take home, I mean, talk about just God's fingerprints all over that, because that was the opposite of, it sounds like, what her mission was, and it was just such a veil of protection. Wow, thank you for that. Um, okay, so let's turn this a little bit into our health. You have, I know you have used your experiences. I mean, you have a lot of experiences, and I know we're not even covering a lot of them here. And then the expertise that you've had of the decades of bodybuilding that you've been doing, and just general fitness. And I know that you have really helped people transform their body. And I think that this is a good time to talk some about that troubleshooting as well. But I think one of the things that would be really interesting to my community is how you intersect that with your faith. One of the things that we talk a lot about Graced Health is, I mean, in fact, I say this at the beginning, is, your eating, movement, and body don't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to do what you're called to do. So we kind of come in with this greater version of like, okay, we're not looking for perfection. What we're looking for is being able to live out the various callings that God has for us, whether it's something that he wants us doing this afternoon, something that he wants us doing so we can serve other people or love other people, or long term. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that God is calling us. I guess let's start with that. Like, how did you start to, or what was the process of integrating your faith and your health?
One is this is where it really started. The 1988 Mr. Universe that I won, I was not a Christian then. My goal was to be the best bodybuilder in the world, and I thought that would make me happy. And winning Mr. Universe was like the pinnacle. And it
Yeah.
was literally one of the saddest days of my life. I looked in the mirror and I said to myself, I don't even like you. I didn't like what I saw in the mirror. I didn't like that person. And I was so sad. And that led me on a journey. Now, and that was the same time, right after that is when that situation happened with this girl. And I started seeking God's face, and I realized that bodybuilding was not the ticket. It wasn't going to make me happy, but there was something deeper. And I learned how to win championships, but what I really wanted was to be a champion. And there's a huge difference. A championship is something that you do, but a champion is who you are. And I was empty outside of competing in bodybuilding. When I learned that people love a winner. And if I could win, I could be loved. They would cheer for me. They would, everybody wanted to talk to me. Everybody wanted to be a part of my circle because, hey, he's Mr. Universe. But outside of Mr. Universe, that's all I had. And in 1989, I went back after becoming a Christian. I had gone on a 40-day fast, lost 52 pounds, and within a year, I was ready to compete again. And I remember praying, and this is what happened, I think, to a lot of Christians. I remember praying, and I was trying to pray and be humble. I said, God, even if I don't, and I was going to say when, I couldn't get those words out. Even if I don't, I said, no, God, I've got to win because I'm representing you. And I think a lot of times with Christians, when we give our lives to God, we move towards humility, which we should, but the Bible says, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, not to the world and the world system, because we become soft and agreeing with things we shouldn't agree with and all of that. But we have to be strong. It takes a strong person to be a good Christian. And so I said, I want to win. I came here to win. You created my body. You made my body what it is. You can shape and form it into what it needs to be to win. I'm representing you and I'm going in to win. So I competed that year and won again, but my goal was not just to compete. My goal was really to compete and win. And so I started looking at the body, the soul, and the spirit, how they're connected. You can't separate them. If something affects my soul, it will affect my body and my spirit. So what I came to understand is God created me in his image, a spirit, then he formed me a body and he breathed into my nostrils and made me a living soul. So I'm body, soul, and spirit, and they all work together. So how can we get them working congruently for God? So that's where the quest started.
That's really great. Yeah. So spirit, so what you were just talking about too, spirit comes first and then body, and then that goes to the soul. And I mean, I wish you could see the notes that I've been taking here and all the little nuggets. I mean, I learned how to win championships, but I wanted to be a champion. I mean, how many of us can resonate there? I think there's so many people out there who think if I fill in the blank, if I lose 5 pounds, if I win my high school state championship, if I, win this next race, whatever, then I'll feel good. Then I'll feel like I've achieved something. And that's just not the case. There's just that emptiness there if we're not filling it up with Jesus, right?
So right.
With the nourishment of God, yeah, and not all these other things. I mean, I think we can't all be Mr. Universe, but I think we can all relate to that feeling of if I only achieve this, then I will feel worthy or accepted or whatever. And that's really really powerful to me. One of the things that you talk about are in your book is soul wounds. Can you go into that a little bit more and teach us some about soul wounds?
Well, one thing with soul wounds, and I had lots of them, lots of soul wounds. And wounds are one thing about wounds. I'll talk a little bit about soul wounds and then scars, because
Yeah.
soul wounds are when you've been hurt and devastated in some form or another. And that leaves an open wound in your soul. And when you have a physical wound, it's bleeding and it needs to be ministered to. So what you do is you put it in the best environment for it to be healed. And the best environment, you clean that cut out and you maybe give it some stitches and you put some salve on it, wrap it up, and you put it in the best position for it to be healed. Well, the thing about our soul is Jesus reserved that for himself. It said he poured out his soul unto death. He poured out his soul for ours. And so when our soul becomes wounded, the best environment for it to be healed is in the presence of God. So we put that wound in the presence of God and we yield it over to him in prayer and give it to him and forgive for whatever caused that wound. And that opens the door for God to mend that wound, and it becomes a scar. Now, the difference between the wound and the scar is the wound festers, and it can be reactivated, and it can even get worse. But a scar is only a memory. It's a memory of the trauma that took place. But a lot of things come with the scar. There's wisdom that comes with the scar. There's knowledge that you can transfer to other people. That scar also brings a compassion for other people that are dealing with what you have
Yeah.
dealt with, and you can help them get through what they're going through, because you said, you can say, if God did it for me, he's no respecter of person, he'll do it for you. And it gives you a broader perspective, and you're not as naive because of the experience that you had. So if you were to take my skin off and look at my soul, you would see not a lot of wounds, but a lot of scars. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm hearing you say too that the scars give us empathy as well.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, that's great. So, talk to me a little bit about, you talk about being in the presence of God. I'm wondering if you have some, and this is all personal. I think what is meaningful or impactful to you might be a little bit different for different people.
Yes.
I just got back from a little bit of your neck of the woods. You're in Utah. I went to Colorado, and oh, let me tell you something. That is the presence of God for me. I live in Houston, so it's very different. But just even driving through the mountains,
Yes. Yes.
oh man, like I thought if I have to turn around and go home right now, I will be refreshed. Just that to me is being in the presence of God. And obviously that's more of a physical thing, but what are some of your, I don't want to say favorite because that can always change, but some impactful or meaningful ways that you like to meet God and be with him?
One is, there are certain songs that I sing that really bring God's presence. And, I realize that the joy of the Lord is our strength. And in the presence of the Lord is the fullness of joy. So if I can get in God's presence, depression can't stay there. If I can get in God's presence, it's impossible for me not to be strong. So his presence is really important. I try every single day to be in God's presence. The first 3 hours of my day is very selfish because it's spent on me and my time with God and just being in his presence. So I may start off by worshiping, and within 20 minutes, I'm the person who didn't cry. I'm in tears, alligator
Yeah.
tears. I'm crying, and I'm feeling God's presence, and then I go before him with whatever petition that I may have or whatever I'm going through that particular day. And there's certain things I pray for every single day, without fail. And I watch God move and work that out. So working out is another thing, that I use to get in the presence of God. Working out, like I may go out to the track and do lunges. And while I'm training, I may do 400 lunges at a time. And while I'm, around the track, and while I'm doing the lunges, it gets really painful. So it gives me a time to
Yeah.
talk to God and reflect on, man, Jesus went to the cross and he carried
Yeah.
that cross. It must have been painful. It's nothing, what I'm going through is nothing compared to what he did. And I try to identify with him and keep pushing through that. And just talking to people. I see people differently than the way I used to. I see people two ways. One is the hurting Jesus, and one is the resurrected Jesus. If they're struggling in life, if they're angry, if they're desperate, if they're, not doing well or cursing, fighting, I see that as the hurting Jesus. If they're strong Christians, I see that as the Jesus that's resurrected. And because Jesus said himself, he said, "Have you gone to the prisons to see me?" No. Did you feed me when I was hungry? No. Well, that's him too. If
Hmm.
what you've done to the least of mine, you've done it unto me. So I see everybody in different eyes. And I realize that some people are hurting, and those are their wounds that are screaming out, and they're letting me experience a little bit, just as a smidgen of the pain that they're really going through.
Yeah, and I have to imagine too. You're probably humble enough that you won't agree with this, but it may be that your presence and your attention to them, and your love in your either actions or words, that spirit in you, through the Holy Spirit helps to start healing those wounds into scars. And maybe that's just one part. Maybe that's just the neosporin that you put on it. There's other things, but I have to imagine that that's really impactful to them, to other people as well. And I love too how you're saying how being in the presence of God, that some of that's just being around other people, and some of that's just seeing them through their eyes, through their experiences, through what pain they may have or the joy. Part of my story, Ron, is I I really tended to turn my health process into, legalism and idolatry. And it was like, this was good or bad, and I have to do this and I can't do this. And I felt a lot of shame when I didn't. And, thank you, Jesus. God brought me out of that. But I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how in someone who required so much discipline, as a professional athlete, how did you keep away from the trap, or avoid the trap of idolatry, of legalism? And I know that you're not doing that. You're not doing that professionally now, right? I mean, yeah, but you
Right, right.
train and you coach and you're in it. Your hands are
Yes,
in it. So,
yes.
how do you manage that?
One is this. When I first started competing in bodybuilding, this is really ironic. I was glutton. I mean, I would eat so much, Amy, until I would lay on the ground and curl up in a fetal position, and I could hardly breathe. My stomach was so tight. I didn't want you close to me because you might take some of my air, but I just needed to let that
Oh.
food digest. I mean, I would eat because when I was younger, I was hungry all the time. And I said, when I
Mm.
turn 18 years old, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to buy food and eat as much as I want. And I did exactly that. So food was a big problem to me. And until I overcame the problem with gluttony, I could never reach the level of uh, competitiveness as I did. But sometimes what I would do is I would fast for 2 days, not eat anything, just not eat. I would call it a food strike because it wasn't really fasting to God,
Mhm.
to try to get my belly down, and to compete in track or boxing or wrestling, whatever it is I was competing in at that time. But when it came to bodybuilding, it required a great deal of discipline. And I began to relate this as I competed as a Christian, related to God. You have to have at least three judges: Father, Son, Holy Ghost, so that you never get a tie. You have to have at least three physical judges. And then the other thing was, you have these little bitty trunks on that you can't hide anything on your body. So if I eat the Twinkies, if I eat the hamburger, French fries, and Coke, and the dessert, of course, if I
Mhm.
eat that, it's going to be showing on my glutes, on my belly, and on my legs. And at one point in time, I'm going to have to stand on stage, and nobody can stand there in front of me and say, "Oh, I made a couple of mistakes." No, those judges are going to judge what they see. And so I started developing a discipline and praying and asking God to help me. And I realized that it's not an easy thing to control what you put in your mouth. From the very beginning, the enemy used food against man to turn them
Mhm.
against God. The forbidden fruit. Most people think it was an apple, but it doesn't say apple. The forbidden fruit. We look at the children of Israel in the wilderness. We look at every generation, and then the Bible says in Philippians 4:19 that their bellies will become their gods. So He's going to use it throughout history. So how can I discipline myself with food? And the thing that gave me the discipline was this: it wasn't willpower. I had a great deal of willpower, but willpower is like a muscle. You use it and you use it and you use it. It gets tired and fatigued, and it wears out and you give in. But something that's greater than willpower is pain or passion. And it was my pain that forced me to go that extra step. After the pain was worn down, and the pain no longer could help me. It wasn't willpower, pain, or passion. It was God's power. It was God's power. When I tapped into God's power, it's like I'm a battery, but He's the power plant. When I attach myself to that power plant, my ability becomes endless now. Now that it's endless, I don't judge other people because I realize that my physique was given to me as a gift. And a gift means you can't earn it. Only thing I did is I worked out and I helped develop what God had already given me. And He gave me the direction on how to do what I've done. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a woman, it was God Himself taught me how to train, how to develop my body. And some of the things were unorthodox, but I just listened to him and I learned some things. Even when it comes to body fat, getting rid of that extra body fat, I had body fat that was created by soul wounds. And until I dealt with those soul
Mm-hmm.
wounds, a certain amount of that body fat would not leave. And so, and I'll give you one example. I had a lady say to me, to be overweight is to be overlooked. After
Yeah.
we dissected it all the way down, Amy, do you know what that meant? It meant this. It meant I was raped through my young life, and it's because I was so attractive. And when I put on weight, I was not being raped anymore. So to be overweight is to be overlooked. Somebody else has to take that responsibility and be abused that way. So subconsciously, she wanted to carry the extra weight. But when she looked in the mirror, she didn't like what she saw. And until we could
Yeah.
deal with what was going on in her subconscious, we could never get the results that we wanted because she had a sabotage tendency locked inside of her. And once we dealt with that, she was able to lose the weight and she realized that it was okay for her to be beautiful.
Some of the books that I've read are really coming to mind as you've talked about it, like the past trauma. The body keeps the score. I have to imagine you're familiar with that, but just how those how our how the trauma of our past really does impact. It impacts our body. It impacts our size. And I can't remember the statistic, but it's a huge statistic of people who are obese have experienced some pretty significant trauma in their life and that's one way of that the body is dealing with that. In your book Faith and Fat Loss, you have 75 different reasons. 75. I'm just going to stop here and let everybody listen to that. Different reasons of why we carry excess body fat. What are some of the ones that you think people are often surprised by, and some that my community, who are often women, 30, 35 to 55 ish, give or take some, who might really, are some of the reasons that, or some of the 75 reasons that might really impact them?
With women, especially with women, this is a huge one, and that's cortisol.
Yeah.
Cortisol is a huge one. And a lot of times when you look at people and you see their lower abdomen has a tremendous amount of excess there, and then it branches out from there to their glutes, legs, and arms, a lot of times that's cortisol release. And that can because from stress, and it's more than one type of stress. There's conscious stress and then there's subconscious stress. For example, if you have sibling rivalry, or you have a parent that was an alcoholic, for example, or you have some sort of trauma that took place in your life, for instance, a rape. Um, let's just talk about that one because it's common. The statistic says 1 out of every 3 women have been sexually abused, and 1 out of 4 young men have been sexually abused. I just happen to be one of those. But this is the way it impacts you. If you have an issue, a trauma that's unresolved in your life, this trauma is unresolved in your life. That trauma is a stress to your body and it releases cortisol. And when that trauma, and it doesn't matter if it happened 10 years ago, you've been releasing cortisol from that trauma for 10 years. Fat is given to us for self preservation. Fat, extra body fat is
Yeah.
given to us for self-preservation. Number one, it has 9 calories to every gram, but protein has 4 calories and carbohydrates have 4 calories. So the fat has twice as many calories. So it's for self-preservation. If you don't have any carbohydrates or protein that you can eat, your body will continue to eat, but it'll eat the fat from your body. And it has twice as many calories to pull from. So fat is given to us for self-preservation. It's good for energy to feed our bodies. It's good to keep us warm, and it also absorbs toxins. When you eat a toxin, it absorbs into the fat cell. The fat will absorb it to keep it from attacking the internal organs. So the fat absorbs that fat, I mean, those toxins. So it's for self preservation. When you have a cortisol issue, like a rape, the body puts on a layer of fat because the adrenal glands release the cortisol, which attacks muscle tissue, converts that muscle tissue into glycogen or sugar, spikes the blood glucose level. The pancreas releases the insulin brings the blood glucose level down. Those extra molecules are converted to triglycerides and pumped into the fat cell. So if you have a rape in your life, this process happens day after day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. After the age of 23 to 28, you'll start seeing the repercussions of it, where your metabolism starts to slow down. It's hard to keep those pounds off, and it starts building up around the abdomen area and disperses throughout the body. When you deal with that issue, when you deal with that issue, that fat is evicted. It has no right to stay there any longer. But you can go on a diet program, you can exercise really hard and get it off, but it has a right to come back because the cortisol that caused it continues to be released and it brings it right back. If you deal with the issue, it goes away and has no right to come back. So that's one. Another one would be fat loss resistant toxins. We have xenoestrogens, we have excitotoxins, and we have foods, some things in our foods, chemicals like MSG. All of those, MSG is a neurotoxin, but they also create excess body fat. So, with that being said, we have these xenoestrogens, which are estrogen mimickers. And you'll find some women that take birth control pills, they'll say, man, I got to get off these birth control pills because of the estrogen that's in the birth control pills creates extra body fat. Well, we've got these chemicals in our water and in our foods, xenoestrogens or estrogen mimickers, that create excess body fat once they get in the body. In a male's body, there's a problem when he has breast tissue and cellulite because that's not normal in a man. And it's because of all of this excess estrogen and chemicals that we're taking in. So if we can detoxify our bodies, fat loss resistant chemical detox, get rid of those chemicals out of the body, you lose the extra body fat. I've had people lose 30 pounds in 21 days just by changing the water they drink and eating a little bit different, never being hungry, and they still lose up to 30 pounds because they're getting rid of those xenoestrogens. Now, the xenoestrogens are in the fat cell, they hold on to the extra body fat. When the xenoestrogen leaves, the fat that was held in the cell follows it right out of your system. So people think, oh, this is a miracle. No, it's science. If you get rid of that estrogen that created the extra body fat, the estrogen mimicker. See, the thing about it, it doesn't dissipate. It's a chemical, so it never goes away. It's not going to die. It's a chemical. So that's two. I could name 75, but those are two that are really common.
Okay. All right. And I assume that the detoxing is something that you do in your coaching programs. Is that correct?
We have a 21-day detox, and the key is never to allow yourself to be hungry. You have
Yeah.
to make sure you're eating enough because if you're hungry, you're also sending a signal to the body of starvation. So the body slows down and learns how to live on less. So it's the combination of foods that you eat together. All calories are not created equal. So you have to eat a combination.
Yes. That is so true. That is so true. I mean, one of the yeah, it is not all about calories in and calories out. That's too simple
Yes,
of math. Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate this. Ron, you had just I feel like I could just ask a million questions, but I won't take your time with all of that. I have a couple follow-up or a couple questions that I ask everybody at the end. Do you have time for that?
I do. I do.
Okay, great. So the first question I have is something I ask everyone, and that is I am fascinated by tattoos. I don't have any. I don't know if I'll ever get one, but I don't have any at the moment. And what I have found is people often will have a story associated with the choice that they have when they put body art on their body for the rest of their lives. So I was wondering if you have any tattoos, if any of them have a story that you would like to share with us, and if not, if you had to get one, what would it be and where would it go?
I do have a tattoo,
Okay.
and the story behind the tattoo is kind of funny. I was a kid. I was in the military, and I went to Germany, and I wanted this tattoo. One of the things I really loved was flowers. I love roses. And so I was going to get this tattoo with a rose, but I didn't want anybody to see the tattoo. So I got it really, really high on my upper thigh. I mean, one of the most sensitive places on your body. And I hate needles. I don't know how I thought I was going to get a tattoo without a needle, you know? And so
That was
they
before the
started,
little go on, sorry.
yes. So what they did is they outlined this rose. And I was ready to stop right then. I was like, no, no more, no more. And at the time, not a Christian, I was drinking German beer. I drank so much German beer at that time. I mean, I was almost out of it. And as they put the outline on it, I didn't want them to put the color inside of it. It was so painful. But somehow I got away with it, and they put the color inside. And I wanted to put a name in it, but I didn't know whose name to put in it, so I left the name out. And after I had gotten started developing a relationship with Jesus, I wanted to put Jesus in there, but it was still too painful to do. And so I have a rose on my upper thigh with no name on it, a space for a name. When I get the courage, I guess I'll get a name, Jesus' name put in there. But it's really, really beautiful, and it's a rose. Some people think, some Christians say that you shouldn't get a tattoo because you're uh, desecrating the body and you're doing these different things. But in the Old Testament, they had different tattoos that they were sacrificing themselves to demon worship and a lot of different things like that, that they try to attribute that to tattoos, that if you have one you can't be saved, and it just doesn't make sense.
No, I agree. I don't think that that makes sense at all. And I think I know a lot of Christians who have some really meaningful and impactful tattoos. Do you have, I used to say a favorite Bible verse, and I realized that, I mean, boy, what, like, that was my friend Emily Baker, who was on a couple years ago. She said, that's like asking me to say what's my favorite movie. There's just so many different genres. And so, do you have a meaningful Bible verse that you would like to share with us?
Well, Philippians says, I can do all things through Christ, that strengthens me. That was my favorite verse at one time. I lived by that verse, but as I become a more mature Christian, one thing that I strive for, and it's really, really close to my heart, and that was learning the meaning of holiness without no man shall see the Lord. And holiness is something that I crave. I crave understanding what it means and living a life of sanctification and being set apart for God, even though the whole world may not understand it. It's really something that I strive for, having a consecrated life and making a difference. Yeah. So holiness without no man shall see the Lord. That's probably a verse that's more meaningful to me these days than any other verse.
And that's in Hebrews.
Yes, it's in Hebrews 12:14.
Okay, this has been just fantastic. I really thank you for your time. I thank you for your vulnerability and just willingness to share so much of your story with my community. We will definitely put the links to Faith and Fat Loss down in the show notes, and tell people where they can also get a hold of you, because you have several different websites. I was actually watching one of your sermons recently, and I love that we can get on and see your faith in action through that, and teaching and leading other people. So tell people where they can connect with you.
One is ronwilliamsministries.com. That's our ministry website. And then, I design exercise equipment.
Yeah, we didn't even get a chance to talk about that.
Well, one piece is called the Iron Chest Master, and that's ironchestmaster.com, which is also found on Amazon. Where else? Or you can always email if there's any questions that I could answer, especially if there were questions that I could answer from this podcast. If they would funnel those questions through you, I would be glad to answer those questions. Glad to
Fantastic.
answer any
Yes.
questions that I could to help. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So what I'll do is I will open up the floor over on the Graced Health Community Facebook group, and then see if there's some follow up questions that people have, and then I will get those to you, probably through your assistant, who's just a delight to work with. And then the other thing too, and this will all be in the show notes, but RW Champion for Life too, as well, which is kind of all things Ron Williams, right?
RW Champion Life.
Champion Life. Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your time, your wisdom, your faith. And just, this has been such a blessing to me, and I really appreciate it.
Amy, thank you. And you make sure it's not too long before you have me back.
I'll gladly have you back anytime, anytime. You're fantastic. Thank you so much. There's a passage in 1 John 4:19 that says, "We love because he first loved us." I feel like Ron is a living, breathing example of this. I just can't comprehend the trauma he's experienced. And to be able to heal from that and then help others in their healing and health and faith and integrating it all is just astounding. What a light. What a light. If you want to dig into the soul wounds and those 75 reasons people carry excess body fat, I encourage you to grab the book, Faith and Fat Loss. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. And I can't leave you without encouraging you to help or to get help if you have unresolved trauma. We are learning more and more about how that impacts our entire body. And Ron just gave such a compelling story and evidence about just one aspect of that. So please do get help if you have unresolved trauma. Don't forget to check out the goodies over at gracedhealth.com/resources. And if this show is valuable to you, would you offer me some value and rate and review it? Or maybe share it with a friend, better yet, on social media. Those are all super, super helpful and appreciated. I'm always really grateful when you do that. Every episode, I try to give you one simple thing to remember, because we have a whole lot, and I want you to be able to walk away with one thing to hold in your hand. And boy, this was really hard for me to come up with because there was so much. But I think this one is, Ron is a man who has accomplished many things. I mean, you heard that when I introduced him. But he realized placing his worthiness and identity in those is just unfulfilling. Filling our souls with the healing peace and love of Jesus is what will make us feel like a champion, even if we don't win any championships. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a graced day.